Darren Hale wasn't just any homeowner. He was a U.S. Marshal with over 2 decades of service under his belt, a man who had seen the darkest corners of humanity and lived to tell the tale. But now, all he wanted was peace. After years of chasing fugitives and staring danger in the face, Darren was ready to slow down. His wife had passed 3 years ago, and the house they'd built together, nestled in a quiet, manicured suburban neighborhood, was filled with memories too heavy to carry alone. He listed the house on a bright Monday morning. The decision hadn't come easy, but the market was right, and he felt it was time to move closer to his daughter in Oregon. Darren had kept his career discreet, blending into the neighborhood like any other retiree with a soft smile and a perfectly trimmed lawn. The neighbors saw him as polite but private, the kind of man who waved but rarely stopped to chat. He liked it that way. Blending in made life simpler. The real estate agent was optimistic. The house was in excellent shape, located in one of the best school districts and tastefully updated. Darren, ever the meticulous planner, had prepared everything in advance: disclosures, inspections, even a home staging consultation. He wanted a clean sale. No drama, no delays. But something changed almost immediately after the sign went up. A knock on his door came the next afternoon. It was Karen. Every neighborhood has one. Karen was theirs. President of the HOA, always with a clipboard in hand, always watching. She wore a tight smile and a tone that suggested authority where none had been given. "I just wanted to remind you," she said, her eyes scanning the "for sale" sign like it was a personal insult, "that any exterior changes, including signage, must be approved by the HOA. Darren nodded politely. "It's a standard sign. Well, within guidelines." Karen's smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened. "Of course, just making sure you're aware." That was the moment something shifted. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Darren had dealt with manipulation before, and this wasn't a neighborly visit. It was a warning, a soft threat wrapped in suburban pleasantry. And though Darren didn't know it yet, that knock would be the first move in a quiet war. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Karen's next visit wasn't about the sign. 2 days after her first drop by, Darren found a neatly folded letter stuffed into his mailbox. It wasn't from the post office. It had been hand-delivered, typed in bold Times New Roman, and sealed with a clip bearing the HOA logo. The subject? Unapproved exterior planting. According to the letter, Darren's recently pruned azaleas extended 2 inches beyond the HOA's regulated line. He read it twice, then chuckled under his breath. This wasn't about flowers. The next morning, a prospective buyer was scheduled to tour the property. Darren made sure everything was in place. Lights on, blinds open, scent diffuser working overtime. But 15 minutes before the showing, his agent texted, "Buyer had to cancel? HOA informed them of unresolved violations?" Darren's jaw clenched. That couldn't be right. He hadn't violated anything, and no such notice had ever been officially filed. He checked the HOA portal. No active tickets, no pending issues. Just silence. He didn't confront Karen. Not yet. In his line of work, you didn't tip your hand early. Instead, he started observing. Subtle things began to add up. A neighbor mentioned being warned by the HOA about declining property values if Darren's house attracted too much attention. Another one mentioned Karen had asked around about his background, wondering why no one knew exactly what he did for a living. Then came the noise complaints. It started with a friendly officer knocking at Darren's door one evening saying someone had reported suspicious activity and loud noises. Darren had been watching TV alone, volume on low. The officer apologized awkwardly. "Protocol," he said. Darren nodded. He'd been on the other side of that knock too many times to take it personally. But it wasn't the last call. A week later, 2 more buyers pulled out after visiting the house. Darren learned, through hushed admissions from the agent, that they had received anonymous letters warning them of pending legal disputes with the HOA. It was a lie, of course, but the tactic worked. Karen, it seemed, was orchestrating a slow, steady campaign to block his sale. She kept it clean. No direct threats. Nothing you could report with certainty. But it was enough. Enough to create doubt, delay, and inconvenience. Darren wasn't just angry. He was intrigued. There was a pattern, a method, and that told him something important. Karen was too confident, too comfortable. She didn't know who she was dealing with. He pulled out his notebook. It wasn't an official case file. Not yet. But the way Karen was moving, it wouldn't stay unofficial for long. She thought she was untouchable, that the HOA shielded her from consequence. But Darren had spent a lifetime dealing with people who thought the rules didn't apply to them. He made a note. Next time, don't answer the door. At first, Darren thought it was coincidence. The next showing was booked for a Saturday afternoon. Perfect weather, a serious buyer, and the agent was confident this one could be it. Darren cleaned the house from top to bottom, polished the windows, even bought fresh flowers to place on the kitchen island. But 20 minutes before the buyer was set to arrive, the sprinklers burst to life, soaking the walkway, the driveway, and anyone brave enough to get within 10 feet of the front door. Darren hadn't reset the timer. It was set for dawn, not 1:40 p.m. And yet, here they were, spraying like something out of a slapstick comedy. The buyer texted the agent, "We'll reschedule." They never did. Later that night, Darren checked the control box. The settings were unchanged. But someone had tampered with the manual override. There were tiny scratches around the switch, the kind someone might leave using a key or a screwdriver. He didn't have proof. Not yet. But his instincts buzzed with that cold certainty that had never failed him on the job. Someone wanted the sale to fail. The next setback was louder. Literally. Week later, Darren scheduled another open house. Just as the first visitors stepped inside, a leaf blower roared to life next door. Karen's husband, who hadn't so much as touched yard equipment in years, was out there with a smug grin, blasting dust and noise into the open windows. When Darren approached to speak, the man shrugged. Just doing a little cleanup. Every time a buyer showed interest, something went wrong. Missing flyers. Petty HOA notices about garbage bins left out too long. Even a claim that Darren's house had termites. Completely false and quickly disproven, but enough to scare off a cautious couple. Still, Darren kept calm. He didn't rise to it. Instead, he documented. Photos, timestamps, notes. Like building a case file. Old habits die hard. Then came the anonymous call to animal control. Darren didn't own a pet, but someone reported aggressive barking and unsafe conditions for neighborhood children. 2 officers came to inspect, confused and apologetic, when they found nothing but silence and a single potted cactus by the door. Each incident seemed petty on its own, but together they painted a picture of slow, methodical sabotage. And Darren knew people like Karen thrived in shadows, relying on others to brush off their behavior as annoying but harmless. But this wasn't harmless. It was strategic, and it was only getting started. Darren knew when a situation called for patience. In his line of work, impulsiveness got people hurt. So instead of confronting Karen head-on, he decided to do what he did best: gather intel. He started small. Conversations with neighbors, casual and unassuming. He asked about the HOA, the neighborhood rules, and what people really thought about Karen. Most were guarded, polite, but a few, when they realized Darren wasn't the chatty type, opened up with quiet sighs and wary glances. "She's been running things like her own kingdom," one man said while trimming his hedges. "You follow her rules, or you find yourself suddenly out of compliance." A woman who lived 2 houses down confided that her daughter's lemonade stand was shut down last summer after Karen cited it as a non-permitted commercial activity. Another neighbor whispered about fines for bird feeders that encouraged wildlife disturbances. Darren didn't respond much. He nodded, asked the right questions, and walked away with more than they thought they'd given. Karen had power, sure, but it was fear-based, not respect-based. That kind of control always left cracks. He began quietly recording the events. He created a private folder on his computer, naming it Routine Notes for plausible deniability. Inside, he stored phone screenshots, photos of Karen loitering near his property line, audio clips of strange sounds outside his windows during key showings. One evening, he reviewed his doorbell camera footage and found Karen pausing in front of his house, phone in hand. She appeared to be snapping a picture of something, but the camera's angle made it hard to tell. A minute later, she turned and left. The next morning, he received another HOA letter. Possible violation. Unauthorized door wreath. Darren almost laughed. She was watching him like a hawk, waiting for him to slip. But what she didn't know was that he was watching too, closer than she could ever imagine. He searched public records late into the night. HOA minutes, fine logs, civil court filings. Nothing criminal, but a pattern emerged. Multiple complaints filed against Karen, then mysteriously withdrawn. Board members who'd resigned suddenly. Quiet settlements. She wasn't just petty. She was practiced. And still Darren said nothing. No threats, no warnings, just silence. Because the thing about silence, it made people nervous. It made them sloppy. Karen was used to pushovers. Darren wasn't one of them. He just didn't need her to know that yet. It happened on a Thursday. Darren had just finished a phone call with his daughter, her voice full of excitement about him moving closer. It was the first time in weeks he'd let himself feel hopeful. The house had a new showing lined up. The agent said the buyer was serious, and everything, for a moment, felt steady again. Then he noticed the back gate was open. Darren always locked it. Habit, muscle memory. He walked outside, slowly, scanning the yard. Everything seemed normal. Until he got to the side of the house and found a shattered pipe, a slow trickle of water leaking into the soil. At first he thought it was a coincidence. Maybe it cracked on its own. But the grass showed scuff marks, boot prints. Someone had been there. That night he checked his security footage. Nothing. The side cameras had been unplugged. Not just turned off. Disconnected at the wires. Clean. Deliberate. That was no accident. That was a message. Still, Darren said nothing. He filed the damage report with his insurance. Quietly had the cameras fixed and upgraded. And he waited. Then came the tipping point. The buyer, an out-of-state nurse relocating for work, showed up with her agent for a final walkthrough. She never made it past the driveway. A police cruiser pulled up as they arrived, lights off but presence loud. 2 officers stepped out, asking for Darren. Karen, standing a few houses down with folded arms, watched like a cat perched near a birdcage. The officers explained. They'd received a report of a disturbance, and someone had mentioned concerns about Darren being a registered weapons handler with mental instability. The accusation was thin, full of holes, but public. Embarrassing. The buyer stepped back. The agent's face tightened. Darren, calm as ever, answered the questions clearly. His credentials were solid, his background spotless. The officers quickly realized the call was bogus, but the damage was done. The buyer canceled the sale within the hour. Darren stood at the edge of his lawn, watching the tail lights fade, his jaw tight, his hands in his pockets. Karen stood in her driveway, sipping. from a travel mug, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. That's when it changed. Not because he was angry. Anger came and went. What stayed was resolve. Karen had crossed a line. Reporting him with false claims to law enforcement wasn't just petty. It was a crime. A deliberate attempt to use the system as a weapon. And Darren knew all too well how people like her operated. They danced right up to the edge, certain no one would push back. But she just made it personal. He went inside, opened a drawer, and pulled out a locked binder. Credentials. Records. A badge few in his neighborhood had ever seen. For years, he'd lived like a shadow in this community. Not hiding, just choosing peace. But peace had a price, and Karen had just raised the cost. He didn't call the police. He called someone else. 3 days passed with no incident. Karen stayed quiet. No letters, no complaints, no sightings. Darren knew what that meant. She was planning something, so he planned too. He adjusted the listing one last time. A new buyer was interested. This one came with a lawyer, sharp as a scalpel, and equally efficient. Darren made sure the showing was low profile. No online alerts. Just a phone call, a scheduled time, and a quiet walkthrough late in the afternoon. The night before, Darren checked his security cameras one final time. Angles were good. Systems were locked. Then he added a new one. Not outside, inside. Tucked, discreetly behind a cabinet vent facing the living room and front hallway. Just in case. The next day, it happened. The buyer arrived, friendly and professional. They were impressed, walked the home, took notes, asked questions. Everything was going perfectly. Then, just as they stepped out onto the back patio, Darren's phone buzzed. He glanced down. The footage loaded. There she was, Karen, slipping. Through the side gate, clipboard in hand, eyes darting. She walked straight into the house, no knock, no warning. Darren's jaw tightened. She moved fast, heading straight for the kitchen, then the hallway, pulling out her phone to snap photos. Of what? He couldn't be sure. Maybe hoping to find some evidence of a violation, something to report, fabricate, twist. She had no idea she was being recorded from 3 angles, and she had no idea Darren was already on his way. He reached the front door in time to hear her heels clicking across hardwood, her breath sharp with focus. She turned the corner and stopped cold when she saw him. He didn't say a word. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out his leather wallet and flipped it open. Badge. ID. U.S Marshal Service. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened. Again. "I've got everything I need," Darren said, voice steady. "You just broke and entered." I didn't. This is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I was just—" "You were trespassing. You were attempting to interfere with a federal law enforcement officer's lawful property sale. And you've been doing it for weeks." The color drained from her face. "And now," he continued, "you're done." Karen didn't say a word as he escorted her outside. But the look in her eyes, shock, confusion, fear, was everything Darren had waited for. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. The truth had spoken for him. Karen didn't sleep that night. The knock on her door came just after dawn, sharp, deliberate. Not aggressive, just official enough to rattle nerves. A local officer stood, on her porch, flanked by a city code enforcement agent. They had a warrant to review property surveillance footage and HOA board activity logs. Darren had submitted everything: timestamps, photographs, emails, video clips. The footage of her breaking into his home sealed it. But what elevated it from petty drama to legal jeopardy was the pattern. The documentation of weeks, maybe months, of systematic harassment and obstruction. She wasn't just being difficult. She was manipulating systems to target someone for personal reasons. and that someone happened to be a U.S. Marshal. By noon, the entire neighborhood knew something had happened. Word traveled fast in the cul-de-sac circuit. But it wasn't Darren who spoke. It was the HOA board. In an emergency meeting held later that evening, Karen was stripped of her role as HOA president. She didn't fight it. She couldn't. The board reviewed the evidence privately, and though the minutes were brief, the conclusion was unanimous. Her clipboard privileges were revoked, her access to board emails and documents cut off. But the real punishment wasn't legal or procedural. It was social. Neighbors who once avoided her now crossed the street without a word. The polite smiles vanished. The people who'd quietly resented her for years finally found their voice. Some asked for audits of fines they'd paid. Others demanded the board re-examine violations issued under her tenure. A family, 2 houses. Down planted a flamingo garden on their front lawn, just to make a point. And Darren? He didn't rub it in. He didn't gloat. He kept trimming his hedges, waving when waved to, watering his flowers like nothing had changed, but everything had. Karen tried to recover, posting in the community group, offering an apology if anyone was offended, citing stress and misunderstandings. No one responded. Her name, once synonymous with control, became a cautionary tale. The house sold 3 days later. Full asking price, no conditions. The buyer? A retired attorney who had read every line of the HOA charter and found it hilariously unenforceable. Darren handed over the keys with a nod and a calm smile. Karen watched from behind a curtain, the same way she'd watched everyone else for years. But now, no one was afraid of her clipboard, because now they knew better. The house felt different once it was empty. For the first time in years, the walls no longer echoed with memories. The framed photos were boxed, the furniture wrapped in blankets, and the rooms smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and closure. Darren walked from room to room slowly, pausing at each threshold. Not to remember what once was, but to let it go. The house had seen joy and grief, laughter, silence, and a quiet war no one had expected. Now it was someone else's turn to fill it. He stepped outside just before sunset, a soft orange glow spilling across the neatly trimmed lawn. The sold sign creaked gently in the breeze. His agent had told him the new owners were thrilled. No contingencies, no games. Just a clean deal. Exactly what Darren had wanted from the start. He locked the front door one final time and slipped the keys into an envelope marked, "Welcome Home," taped it to the mailbox. Then he walked to his truck, opened the door, and looked back. Karen's house sat quiet across the street. No eyes behind curtains this time, no clipboard, just stillness. He didn't hate her. He understood people like her. He'd dealt with worse, people who built their sense of control on fear, who pushed until someone pushed back. What Karen never expected was that her quiet, polite neighbor was trained to dismantle chaos without ever raising his voice. That was the job. Not the badge, not the title. The discipline, the patience, the ability to let things build until the right moment, to move only when the ground was solid beneath your feet. As he drove away, Darren thought about his wife. She would have laughed at how the whole thing unfolded. She always said he was like water, calm until the dam broke. Then everything changed. The road ahead was long, lined with pine trees and promise. His daughter had already cleared out the guest room. Her boys had made a "Grandpa parking only" sign out of cardboard and glitter. He smiled at the thought. There was peace in the leaving. Sometimes the hardest part of letting go isn't the goodbye. It's the decision to stop holding on, to stop fighting battles just because you can. Karen wasn't worth his energy. She never had been. But what she had offered, unwittingly, was a reminder. Justice isn't loud, it's patient. And when it arrives, it doesn't kick down the door. It simply stands there, calm and certain, and says, "This ends now." And just like that, it does. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.